5 on Zelle and on PayPal. $ straight words, the number 4 at gmail.com. Hopefully, Brother Naba will dial back in so he can get in this conversation with Uncle Bobby Johnson and get some of his insight, Brother James G.
Yes,
so that closes out this hour. We're going to be back right here on WVON 1690. This is the Talk of Chicago. All right, brothers and sisters, you're listening to the radio show that believes in freedom, justice, and equality for all the people of the earth. This is Straight Words coming to you every Tuesday from 9 p.m. until midnight. And, of course, the creator is our great brother, Brother Nabab Richard Muhammad, editor-in-chief of the greatest publication on the planet, the Final Call newspaper. Brother James G. Muhammad is our co-host, as well as me, Brother B.J. Murphy, and we are here on WVON 1690, the Talk of Chicago. We got a great hour lined up for you right here on WVON. You can join our conversation because I know you want to get in on this riveting conversation we're going to have about police brutality. 773-591-1690, 773-591-1690. Last week, Governor Gavin Newsom of California announced that our big brother Cephus, Uncle Bobby Johnson, is going to be on the Police Accountability Board. He was appointed by the governor to be on that board. And, of course, he is the uncle of Oscar Grant. And you remember that story back in 2009. Oscar Grant was shot and killed by a former BART police officer who claimed he mistook his gun for a taser and killed him on the platform. And, of course, this was captured on cell phone, and it sparked widespread protests all around the country. And in the Bay Area, he's joining us tonight. Assalamu alaikum, big brother. How you doing?
Wa alaikum salam, B.J. Murphy.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Families United for Justice is the name of his organization, and the Love Not Blood campaign. You've heard him on our show several times, and we thank you for joining us from the West Coast tonight. And Brother James G is going to start off with the questioning. Yeah. I know we got our other special guest, Brother Carlton Meyer. He's going to join us with his part. But let's start off with Uncle Bobby G, Brother James.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, that's great. Assalamu alaikum, Uncle Bobby. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and we thank you for joining the show. How you doing? First of all, I'd like to just get the barometer of how you doing today.
Yeah, wa alaikum salam. I am, blessed to be alive first. I'm breathing. So all praises to Allah for that. And secondly, we doing all right as a family. We are, just making the best of what we can of this life that we have.
Yes, sir. It's a blessing. Every day above ground is a blessing, as they say.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I don't know.
I'd like to just clarify really quick, if I can. Myself, and of course my wife, Auntie B, affectionately known, Beatrice X. We founded the Love Not Blood campaign, and that campaign word is utilized because we have various campaigns that we do, and one of our campaigns is this network of families we have that's called Families United for Justice Network. So that's just one of our campaigns. So it's Love Not Blood campaign, which Families United for Justice is a part of us in the work that we do as far as one of our campaigns concerned. And it centers mainly around our conferences, and we titled that Healing Through Resistance.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, there, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And your work is known throughout the country, and we thank you for all the great work that you do. Brother BJ mentioned the announcement that Governor Newsom appointed you to the Accountability Board. How do you feel about that? How did you receive that, given the mission that you and your lovely wife and your organizations are dedicated to?
Well, I I just felt that it was necessary for those of us who have been impacted to, be at the table and to do the work that we can while we're at that table to bring about that real systemic change that we're fighting for. And so, of course, 14 years later, Here we are now, here I am now, not without the help of my wife, of course, being selected to be a part of a piece of legislation that we worked so hard to get passed. And now to be able to sit on that, just back up really quick, that legislation that we passed, Senate Bill 2 or SB 2, decertification of police officers, was a very important bill to us because we know Joanne Smedley, who murdered Oscar Grant, my nephew, should have been decertified before Oscar was murdered. He had 8 complaints, use of force complaints filed against him before Oscar was murdered. And of course, without any action taken, without decertifying him, without addressing his issue concerning young black men, he goes on to murder Oscar Grant. So, this journey has been really real for me, extremely important, and, hoping to be a part of bringing real systemic change so that no other family have to suffer the harm from a police officer that we know should be decertified or no longer working for a policing agency nowhere in this country.
Because as you mentioned, and at least in my view, normally the people who should be at the table aren't always at the table. In Chicago, it happens all the time, especially when things are happening in the community and the community is calling for participation, community participation agreements and that kind of thing. So did you see this as being somewhat unusual that you were invited to be a part of it? It was well deserved, of course, but how did you view it happening at this time? Was it somewhat unusual, or did it just go along with a natural occurrence to be included as a community member?
Well, I tell you, since Oscar was murdered, I've always been in the process of doing something to bring some systemic change. And, and of course, being a part of the initial introduction to working to reform a system or change a system that has been detrimental to us, it started with 1586, the Citizen Oversight with an Independent Auditor, oversight committee that we were able to get passed. And from that journey, of course, I, worked with various coalitions throughout the state of California to get other pieces of legislation passed. And so being at the forefront, and when we brought SB 2 into existence, we brought it into existence with the hope that it would include impacted families. So the way it did pass, the board, the Peace Officer Standard Accountability Advisory Board consists of 9 members, right? And they are to be appointed by the governor and legislators. The board is composed of 1 current or former police officer with command experience, 1 current or former police officer with management rank, 2 members of the public with experience working at a nonprofit or academic institution, 2 members of the public with experience working with community-based organizations related to police accountability, 2 members of the public with strong consideration given to individual who has been subject to wrongful use of force likely to cause death or serious bodily injury by a peace officer, or who are a surviving family member of a person killed by a wrongful use of deadly force by a peace officer, and 1 attorney. And so we put that in intentionally with the hope that one of us that are impacted will actually be able to sit at that table and to ensure, at least work to ensure, that it's working the way we brought it into existence. And so, I praise Allah and thank Allah for Governor Newsom, because we've met several times through the process of me going back and forth to the state capitol, but to recognize that I've been putting in this work and that I, always been fighting to be at the table and has been one with other families and coalitions throughout the state of California getting legislation passed so that we can stop this egregious act. And so, I want to say that I was surprised. It was expected that one of us be at that table, and I'm just thankful it's me.
Yes, sir. I was going to ask you about the composition, and now that you broke it down, it seems, seems very, very positive. I mean, you got 6 people from the public, 2 officers, and 1 attorney, if I'm correct in recounting what you said. So that's a positive thing to hear. Got two quick questions. Do you feel? I mean, despite everything that has occurred in terms of organizing organizing the board, that in the end it's going to really have some teeth. The objectives that you put forth to hold these police officers accountable or law enforcement officers accountable. That once you all make decisions, that the teeth will really sink in.
Well, of course, that's always the challenge whenever a piece of legislation is passed, because we know, especially in the state of California, how the peace officers union fights for any change to occur. So, of course, I have some concerns, but I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that we will have some teeth. It may not be a full mouth full of teeth like, our other guest speaker, who I think can speak, very knowledgeably to what I'm speaking about in the various other types of decertification boards that are set up throughout this country. Matter of fact, the brother Carlton Meyer is actually from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a very powerful op-ed concerning decertification, concerning the, of course, Chicago Police Department. But going back to it, there are some concerns, because one of the concerns is when the Internal Affairs does an investigation on an officer. And right now, because we already have 3,500 officers that are going to be looked at as being decertified,
wow.
Our workload has been, I should say our workload, the post workload, and then, of course, our starting officially on December 14th is already overwhelmed. So there's conversations that I'm reading and hearing that some of those investigations are going to be done by the Internal Affairs. Now, we know what happens when an Internal Affairs investigates an officer. Normally, they don't sustain any claims. The officer gets off. He might get a suspension, but he goes back to work, and eventually, as we know, many cases, they kill again. And so, yes, I'm going to be, again, cautiously optimistic that we will have some bite power, but ultimately, as I was speaking to Carlton and listening to him, there's still some other maneuvers we're going to have to put into this board or this legislation to even make the bite harder. If that makes sense.
Yes, sir, it makes sense. It does, because that's what we're always looking at. We'll get to Mr. Mayer in a minute, but I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, even in terms of accountability, the officer that shot Oscar, I think his name was Johannes. Even when he was sentenced, I don't look at his sentence as even accountability or even the charge that they brought. But I guess that's another tale. I was reading one of the articles, and of course it mentioned a press release that was put out by Governor Newsom. But I was kind of curious about, because in the next sentence it mentioned that it mentions your name, and then it says a Democrat. And I was just curious of this is minor probably, but to me I'm saying, okay, well, why is that thrown in there? Was that thrown into the governor's press release and they're just recounting it, or is this the reporter, bringing up, they could have said Johnson, an activist, or freedom fighter, whatever, but they said a Democrat, and I just raised something in my antenna.
It did the same to me, because I saw it behind my name, but then I also saw it behind everybody else's name that was selected. So that emphasizes the fact that I guess all the board members are Democrat, is a subliminal call out, I guess, giving some kudos to, our governor, California Governor Gavin Newsom, and making sure he selects Democrat folks, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah. It was just curious about that, man. It just kind of popped up like unexpectedly there.
I know.
Okay.
I'm like, where'd that come from?
No, that's exactly what I thought. We want to bring Brother Mayer in, but Brother BJ, is anything you want to bring up before we bring our other distinguished guests on?
No, sir. We want to hear from Mr. Mayer now.
Mr. Mayer,
that
right.
certification. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Brother Mayer, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you. How are you today?
Oh, I'm well. You sound a bit low on your end, but okay, I'm well.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Okay, now I hear you.
I had to switch headpieces. It sounds like you're traveling, so we'll try to make it quick. But can you just give us a little background on yourself? We know you wrote an op-ed about these certifications, and we want to get into that. But before we do, just give us a little background about yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I apologize. Yeah, I'm driving into New York City, and I know it's raining on the road, so it's all right. But yeah, my name is Carlton Meyer II, Esquire. I'm a national public safety and policing reform expert, and I work with communities across the country. And when I say communities, I mean community members, I mean law enforcement, I mean state and local lawmakers, I mean the local media, I also mean private business. So essentially, I work with all of the key public safety stakeholders in every community across this country on breaking out of their silos so that they can start working together instead of separately on solving public safety challenges, right? And when I say public safety challenges, I don't only mean community violence and reckless driving. I also mean police accountability, right? And so what I really focus on is an approach that I developed called the Community Empowerment Centered Approach, which is implemented through the CAP method. C stands for community empowerment, A stands for accountability, and T stands for transparency. So essentially the crux of it is that community members, especially those individuals who are living in what I call neighborhoods of intersectionality, meaning that these are neighborhoods where you have both high levels of crime and also a history of high levels of negative police interaction, like racial profiling, excessive use of force, sexual misconduct, etc. Those community members especially need to be involved in, need to have knowledge of, and need to have meaningful decision-making authority over all direct police-civilian interaction, like stops, arrests, uses of force, surveillance technology, the way protests are handled, etc. And the reason for this is because the people closest to the problems are also the people closest to the solution. So we need to make sure, just as we've been talking about with Mr. Johnson, Uncle Bobby, now being on this post commission where he now has some say over officers who've been accused of misconduct to determine if they should keep their ability, being their certification, their license, to be able to be a police officer in the state of California, or if that should be taken away from them, which means now the best that they could be is a civilian employee at a police department, okay? So you're stripping them away of the ability to arrest people, from the ability to patrol with a firearm and receive all those protections under police union contract, under U.S. Supreme Court law, and most importantly, the ability to transfer from one law enforcement agency to another, which is something that we've seen time and time again in the past with Mike Brown, the officer that killed him, Darren Wilson. He was what we call the wandering officer, meaning that he was engaging in accountability at different police departments. When he would be caught and investigated at one, he would just resign and then go to another police department, do the same thing, get caught, be investigated, then he would resign and then go to another police department without any accountability. The same thing with the officer who killed Eric Gardner in New York City, former officer Pelatineo, whatever his name is. But yeah, that guy. And then even more recently with the officer who killed Breonna Taylor. okay,
Exactly.
in Louisville, Kentucky. Even though, we know that he was his bullets that killed him, he was never held liable. And then he just got fired, went over to another police department adjacent to Louisville. And now, what is he doing? He's once again being prosecuted for engaging in misconduct. He is a wandering officer. So what I'm trying to say is that if we don't put directly impacted people, like Uncle Bobby, into these positions where they can now determine real accountability, then we are only going to see the same things over and over. We're going to see a Band-Aid on something that needs stitches instead of stitches for something that needs stitches. So that's what I do, is I work on how do we get those stitches and make sure that the stitches are custom tailored for that community. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It has to be custom tailored for that community.
Yeah, you mentioned like the three examples, and we know there are more because it's happening far too often. How often is it happening that they are being held accountable? How many decertifications that you are aware of actually have occurred, or is this something that is, from what I read, more and more civilian review boards and other oversight boards? But how often presently are we seeing any kind of action going to decertify police officers so that they can no longer hold a post that allows them to come under a badge?
Well, number one, it doesn't happen often enough, and it varies by state, because each state at this point, this is actually kind of new, that all 50 states have their own post commission, which is the Peace Officer Standards and Trainings Commission. That's essentially and it could be called something different by state, but that's essentially the state entity that's responsible for all certifications and licensing for all police officers in that state, which means that they're also responsible for revoking that license, or what we call decertification. Now, that's all new ever since the 2020 protest. There have been, I think, at least 40 or 45 states that have passed comprehensive policing reform legislation into law, including California and including Illinois. And each one of those states, for the most part, they had some legislative language in that law that relates to decertification and certification of law enforcement, and reinforcing that language if it did not already exist. And so now we're starting to see more states on a national level decertifying officers, but the numbers are still low, and I'm going to tell you why right now. It's because of the process, right? You've got to focus, in my opinion, more on the process, more on the how, rather than on what, right? Which is rather than on the outcome. And so the process that is typically used to decertify law enforcement is that either the police chief or the sheriff, they're the only two entities that are able to actually file what we call a notice of violation of certification. That's essentially a complaint filed with the Post Commission to then start investigating that officer to begin the decertification process. Now, more recently, over the years, I'd say ever since 1968 with the state of Kansas, that was really the first state that allowed for civilians, people that are not, chiefs or sheriffs, to be able to file a notice of violation of certification directly with their post commission. In the 1970s, there were a couple of other states, or a few others, and then years later, and especially after 2020, we now have more states. Even in Massachusetts in 2021, they passed a state law where their post commission that's newly created consists of majority civilians who do not have a law enforcement background. I believe it's like 9 civilians, and I think then there's like an additional 3 that are law enforcement background, but they're only there in an advisory role. And so, it's becoming a big deal now to actually have not only civilian representation, but also to allow civilians to report directly to the Post Commission about a notice of violation of certification. So, I do think that as more and more civilians, community members become aware, like in Illinois, of the state law that allows them to do this now, that we will start seeing more civilians filing these complaints and hopefully start seeing an increase in decertifications happening around the country.
So once they file the complaint, and Uncle Bobby can jump in on any of this that we're talking about. Once they file a complaint, it goes to, who does it go to in most cases? What authority does it go to for review? I file a complaint. The citizen files the complaint to the, what kind of office would that be, and who is it that takes that complaint?
Do you want me to answer or Uncle Bobby?
Yes, sir. I'm asking you. No, you.
Oh, me. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Once they file the complaint, it goes directly to the post commission. Now, different post commissions are set up differently. Okay,
because I'm curious about what is there. Is that like referring it up to the FOP? What is their, mission? Who are they aligned with? The authority that looks at this.
Right. So there's two pieces I want to just flesh out. One is that the representation of the post commission typically are people that are former law enforcement, former judges, and or former prosecutors, right? So these are individuals that, tend to have a more tough on crime response rather than a community centered response. And so that's one thing. The other thing to highlight is that another thing that results in a limit on who gets decertified is the fact that not all state laws have a broad scope of eligibility. A lot of states, they only provide for certain felonies that if an officer is charged with or if they're convicted of or plead guilty to or nolo contender, meaning that they're saying I'm not guilty or innocent, I'm not going to say anything. If that were to happen, then that's when they can be decertified. But if it were to be a misdemeanor like violent offense or sexual offense, then that would not fall under the scope of eligibility of decertification. Now, I just want to say, because we are in Illinois, that Illinois, after the Safety Act, which I did work with the Legislative Black Caucus on drafting the language of the policing reform, including decertification for the state of Illinois and the Safety Act, that actually is one of the best state laws in the country when it comes to decertification, because it does provide for any felony and certain misdemeanors that are violence related or sexual related can make an officer in the state of Illinois eligible to lose their license. Also, real quick, just last thing, is that also in the Safety Act, it also provides that if an officer engages in actions that are not necessarily criminal in nature, but that are still considered unethical, like lying, being affiliated with a hate group, right, or tampering with body-worn camera or dash cam footage, that can also get you decertified. That's a big deal when we're talking about police accountability.
Yeah, and if BJ has anything to jump in, but is decertification, is that like on a federal level, or, how is it any way somebody can get around the decertification? You get decertified, is there any kind of way they can creep back in somewhere in a law enforcement capacity, become an enforcement officer in some capacity again?
Well, okay, so you're saying like after they've been decertified?
Yes.
Oh, Bobby, do you want to take it?
Well, of course, I'm not going to know enough of that, but I was going to just say this in the state of California, just based on my understanding of our SB2, right? The employing agency of the peace officer must report any allegation of serious misconduct to post, right? That, again, triggers this possible decertification process. But in addition to that, right, it can also be triggered by a civilian oversight body, a sustained deposition of an internal affairs investigation. It could be triggered by a civil judgment or settlement based on alleged serious misconduct. So, those are some of the ways that the triggering of possible decertification of an officer can happen in the state of California.
Yes,
but I think Carlton would be better equipped to answer that last question you just posed.
Yeah, because Uncle Bobby, because my particular question was, let's say I'm an officer, I do something terrible, I get decertified in the Illinois or whatever, Chicago police. Does that certification become known like on a federal level, national, that anytime I apply for some type of law enforcement position, that it pops up and says his license has been taken away and that I can no longer hold a post if it's in some backwoods city. Is it that kind of penalty on it, or can I get around it by taking another course and reapplying for a license?
I think, I'll definitely let Carlton finish. But so if you get decertified in the state of California, you can no longer be employed in any policing agency in the state of California. So that means there is a state database that's going to hold the records of officers that has been decertified. And I hope that there's a requirement on every agency that is hiring a person or a previous law enforcement officer that they review that database to make sure that they're not in it. Now, let's say the officer leaves the state of California and goes to New York. Now, I'm not sure if there's federal requirements that the New York agency that is potentially going to hire this officer is required to check national database, and I don't think there's one that exists, but check a national database if there was, whether the officer actually has been decertified. So then the question becomes, is it possible that he could go to New York and be hired? I mean, with my limited knowledge at this moment in time, it almost appears that he can, because I know officers have left New York, came to Oakland, and killed again. And this is before we even begin to really talk about decertification. And the reason why they get hired like that is because a policing agency is in need of officers, so they're less equipped or less tempted to really investigate an officer to see what kind of history. They bring him on board, and then we find out he kills again, or he's got some use of force complaint filed against him, and then they find out this history, like we did with officers coming from New York. So, I mean, yeah.
Or even if there's a database, or a requirement that the hiring agency must check their check. Like if he's in New York, it's required that they check his previous state that he's coming out of. If that's not in existence, that's also somewhat of a loophole. So that's why I was asking.
I'd love to hear Carlton respond to that.
Yeah. So so there's a couple of things to that. One is that there is what they call a national database called the NDI. So that N like Nancy, DI. That stands for National Decertification Index, and that is monitored and updated by an international organization called, I forgot the exact name of it, but the acronym is like the letter, like the word it, A like Apple, IADLEST is essentially the acronym, IDLES. So they've been in operation for quite some time now. The problem is, even President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force report recommendations that were published in 2015, they have a whole section dedicated to decertification, the IADLEST, where it talks about how the National Decertification Index needs to be utilized more, and there needs to be more centralization, where you have each state post-commission submitting their decertification list to the National Decertification Index, so that way it's all located on a national database. Now, the only problem is that the IADLEST and the NDI are under-resourced. And so that was another part of the recommendations, was for the federal government to provide more resources to those the entity in that database, so that they would have what they need to be the infrastructure and capacity to be able to update and monitor that list. Now, the good news is this, though. That was 2015. Here we are, 8 years later? We had the 2020 protests, and like I said earlier, there's been at least 40 states across the country that have passed comprehensive policing reform legislation into law that heavily focuses on decertification and certification. Now, a part of a number of those states' laws that passed ever since 2020 was that not only requiring that officers that are decertified are placed on a list, a database that would be made public in that state. Like Illinois has that, for instance, with the Safety Act. It does provide on the Post Commission's website called the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board, LSB, to have a list, a database of all officers that are under investigation for decertification, and then a separate database for just officers that have been decertified. Okay. Now that you can look that up right now. It's on the website for everybody to see. Now, this is the thing. It's not required under the Safety Act like it is in some other states. I want to say possibly Massachusetts or possibly Colorado, that in addition to having a database that's public, also require that their state post commissions report those decertifications to the National Decertification Index to be included on that national database. Now, there's a number of states that are also requiring that. So that's something that when we talk about future legislation in states like Illinois, maybe even California, that's something that can be added to those existing laws, is to now require that those databases are now reporting to the National Decertification Index.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, sir. Brother Bobby, Uncle Bobby, on your case with the officer, how you say his last name? Mercifully?
Johannes Messerly. Yeah, Johannes Messerly.
Messerly. They did reopen the case to see what further could be done, as I understand it. Anything come of that? I read where they tried to reopen the case.
Right. So no, we did get it reopened. So actually, it's a two-part to that. So maybe about 3 years ago, our district attorney Nancy O'Malley did reopen the case for further investigation. However, she also concluded after about a 9-month investigation that they could not pursue any more charges, not so much against Johannes Messerly. The reopening of our case centered around Tony Peroni, who actually put his knee on Oscar's neck, pushing his face through the concrete floor, cracking the bones in his face. Tony Peroni also is the one that used a racial epithet 3 times, right, before he threw Oscar to the ground, because we alleged that we thought it should have been a hate crime in the language that he used in the process of throwing Oscar to the ground. He is the same one that also initially pulled the young man off the train, punched Oscar knee. The Oscar's all on video. Of course, spoke in a very egregious and belligerent way to Oscar. And yet he escaped prosecution. And part of the reason why he escaped prosecution is because at that time we were so naive. The district attorney said they wanted to use him for state evidence to get Johannes Messerly. And so the whole focus was Johannes Messerly when really it should have included Tony Peroni. So now Tony Peroni, after he was fired, he then went into the military, stayed in the military about 6 years. And when he came back to the United States is when they really made sure he was fired, because he went through the arbitration procedure to get his job back. But he had committed unemployment fraud in the state of California, so they was able to legally fire him. Otherwise, he would have got his job back. So we have been arguing and chasing him for years. They reopened it, and Nancy O'Malley felt that they could not get felony murder charges on him, but what they could have charged him for was an assault, a battery, or whatever it was called. I forget exactly. But the statute of limitation ran out, so they dropped the case. Then State Attorney General Rob Bonta said that he would reopen the case for further investigation. It was more to us a political move on his part because we're still awaiting his final decision on the so-called investigation that they're doing. But yes, the case was reopened not on Johannes Messerly, but on Tony Peroni, who assisted Messerly in killing Oscar on that platform.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Uncle Bobby, I want to ask you a question. Okay, we got Uncle Bobby on the line, y'all. Uncle Bobby Johnson out of Oakland, California. He's just been appointed by Gavin Newsom, governor of California, to be on the Police Accountability Board. And we're also joined by an expert on decertifying police officers, Mr. Carlton Meyer. And I wanted to say to you, brother, This is a very wonderful opportunity for you to represent the families that you've been representing all this time, the families that have been suffering, seeking justice. When you were appointed, I know all the people that you've been helping flashed in your mind. Tell me, what is your definite chief aim when you start this job, and if you could tell the people back home what you plan on doing and making your voice count on this board, what would you say to them?
Well, of course, first, we got to get to the table. And now that I'm at the table, it's not just going to happen. It's going to not only take me utilizing my voice, but it's going to take a lot of support from the community and those that feel that, like I do, that they should also be involved. And so ultimately, the essence behind this is accountability. And to be moving in that direction, to hold officers accountable, whether it be through the certification, of course, taking the leap to qualified immunity, because we know that's a major hurdle to overcome. But again, being cautiously optimistic, I believe it's 4 states that actually have gotten rid of qualified immunity. And as, of course, Brother Carlton talked about, there's a few states that have tied their decertification to qualified immunity, and it works in various ways. So to never give up hope, to continue fighting, because, we've been doing this for 14 years. And as we could say, going on 15 years, but as I can say, sadly, it seems like more of us are still dying and nothing is happening. And so, I'm not taking a pessimistic view about this, because my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren is dependent on me standing up today and really working to bring real systemic change, because if I fail today, it'll be their demise tomorrow. So, my hope is that it begins to happen all over the country. And as I develop this relationship with Brother Carlton, what I've learned is that, I think he said Massachusetts, they got 9 civilians on the post-commission. That's huge. So that community involvement that he talked about is serious, because I think, it's my belief that until we're actually a part of this process in bringing about the change, nothing will never change. So I cracked the door. I kicked the door open, just like Oscar kicked the door open. He joined his ministry with the first officer in the state of California to ever be arrested, charged, convicted, and sent to jail. That was the first time. And since he's been arrested, I think 4 other officers, it's sad there's only been 4 after all these years, but 4 other officers have been basically, I know 1 or 2 have been convicted and 2 others are charged and waiting trial. So it's happening. That change is occurring in the state of California. I think it's happening on a national level. And I think, with people like Brother Carlton and, others like myself, that is about really bringing about this change, is doing the work to make it happen, getting the community involved, so
yes, sir. I wanted to ask one more question, Brother James D., real quick to Mr. Carlton. When you talked about the certified officers and the ones that were involved in some of the most heinous killings of black people and police brutality in the last couple of years, is there some kind of data that we could do some research on, and some of these killings of black people, could we find out that most of these officers have been decertified and they went to another police department and to get a job, and they ended up killing black people with impunity because there weren't no checks and balances because of the corruption?
I don't know. I'm sure there's somebody at a university somewhere in the U.S. Doing that level of research. The problem is that not all states like Illinois provide their decertification database, publicly. And so it would only be available to police chiefs and sheriffs because they're the ones responsible for hiring, right, and firing of officers in their agencies. So, there really is, in my opinion, and like I said, there might be some universities who are, taking the data from places like Illinois where those databases are public and then actually tracking them. They are probably also cross-referencing that data with officers that are placed on the National Decertification Index to see if there's any correlation with officers being on that index and still, getting jobs in other states where they're not decertified, even though they've been decertified in a previous state. So, I just don't know of that data. But something I can say real quick is that, when it comes to states, providing their decertification data to the National Decertification Index, I did recently learn that the Biden administration has been incentivizing post commissions to provide that data, or states to provide that data to the National Decertification Index through federal grant money that's provided for public safety issues. And so what I've been told is that all states, except for one at this point, are now providing their decertification data to the federal government to go on the National Decertification Index. And that one state that's not doing it is, of course, the maverick state, the state of Arizona. They choose to not take the money so that they're not conditioned to have to provide that data on the National Decertification. So at this point, we are getting to what I'm trying to say is that George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all those deaths that led to the 2020 movement, it has led to some big change, like long lasting, not short term. But the problem is that people in the community, we don't realize the power that we have now because of that change. Right. And so that's why it's important that, like, not only the op-ed, but also other op-eds, other people that are getting out there talking about decertification, like Uncle Bobby, right? We need to make sure that all gets uplifted, because at this point, like in Chicago, we're hearing about 100 officers, have been found to have lied, and they're still on the Chicago Police Department. Right. Well, everybody's saying, including civilian oversight, what are we going to do? We can't go to like internal disciplinary hearings because of arbitration now, and what else? The criminal liability is out the window for some of them. Civil liability is out the window. Well, guess what? You can still file the decertification, because decertification is independent from criminal, civil, and internal disciplinary action. So no matter what those other avenues of accountability, what those decisions are, the decertification process still goes forward on its own. So somebody can not be held criminally liable, not be held civilly liable, and not be fired, but they can still lose their license to be a police officer in that state.
Brother Mayor,
Brother Nabok's back on. Brother,
okay, real quick.
Yeah, Brother Nabok wants to come back in, Brother James G.
Okay. Well, okay, go ahead. There you go.
Brother Nabok.
Yes, I'm like, Brother James, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't break your...
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's been a great interview. But on Uncle Bobby and Brother Gabe answered to part of this question. We see these victories like the victory of creating this accountability panel. But that took work. So, Uncle Bobby, when you're looking at the work that you're doing and the work of this panel, are there any things that come to mind that Black media, Black churches, Black organizations, Black people need to do specifically to support what you're trying to do in California? Because it's going to be a fight. At a certain point, some legislators are going to attack it. The media is likely to attack it. And we know the police union is already attacking it.
Yes. So was that a question? I'm definitely in agreement with you about the attack.
Yeah. Yeah. The question was, are there any things that come to your mind that we should be doing right now or getting prepared to do to support the work that you're going to do and the work that this panel is intended to do?
What you're doing right now, having this conversation with myself and, of course, Brother Carlton, So those ears that are listening to this show, Black Talk Radio, and hearing and getting a better understanding of this power behind decertification and how it can work and the process behind it. Like, for instance, I know in the state of California, there's much more that don't know that you can actually file a decertification, to post the corruptness of a particular officer that have lied, committed some form of use of force, even a shooting, involved in a shooting, what have you, directly to post. And so that opens the window or triggers that investigation for decertification. So that's a good thing. Because many of us just go straight to internal affairs. And, a lot of that stuff, as we know, get buried or not properly investigated. The officers usually get off, and it keeps us discouraged and wondering, well, how can we hold the officers accountable when it don't even appear that the agency cares about what they do? So, of course, we got to let the community know that there's avenues, and what I'm hoping to believe that we have some more power to make sure that these officers are decertified. But in addition to that, gives us the ability now to start looking at how to attack qualified immunity so that officers can also be sued directly for these murderous acts that they commit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Thank
Got
you.
about 4 minutes left. Go ahead, brother.
That's Uncle Bobby X Johnson.
Yeah.
Don't forget
Right.
that.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right. Don't forget the X.
He for real, for real. Don't forget that.
That's right.
Hey, brother, can I just real quickly, I wanted to ask this right along the lines of what you all have been saying, and brother can give a quick answer. Brother Meyer, in terms of filing the complaint for decertification, is it the simple fact that somebody on that board just needs to file it? Because, like you said, if that's all they have to do, you don't have to answer it, but I'm just saying, like, what's preventing them from doing that? If it's just a simple thing of, you can just go right to them and make that filing. I don't know if you have enough time to answer, but I just wanted to put that out there, and hopefully.
Yeah. So you mean like for a civilian to file it?
Yes. Or members of the board.
One of the members of the Post Commission?
Yes. Yes.
So
we got about 1 minute to there, Brother Carlton.
Gotcha. All right. So the Post Commission would not file it. It would have to either be a police chief, a sheriff, or in states that allow for it, a civilian or civilian review board or a prosecutor.
So our civilian review board can deal with that. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Definitely. Yes. You're welcome.
And thank you all for being on. Go ahead, BJ.
Brothers, thank y'all so much. Thank you, Uncle Bobby X Johnson. Thank you, big brother, for being with us. Thank you, Mr. Carlton Meyer. Thank you so much. We got to have y'all back on to follow up on this. Congratulations to you, brother Bobby.
I appreciate it. Thank you, too. Much love.
Much love
Thank
to
you,
brother.
guys. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
All right, thank y'all.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Listen, we got about 1 minute left in the show. Any closing words there, brother James G?
Cash App. That's my closing announcement. What is it? Cash App. Straight words,
That's right. Cash App. $ straight words. $ straight words on Cash App. $ straight words on Cash App. Make a donation. Zelle 312-480-9775. 312-480-9775. And on PayPal, straight words, the number 4 @gmail.com.